Hello, everybody. My name is Dusty Whirl. I'm the CoC Performance Manager here on the planning team here at Texas Homeless Network. And today the training is going to be focused on CoC documentation requirements. So, what are some of the learning objectives that will occur in this training? So, one of the first ones you'll do is understanding documentation rules and why they matter, complying with HUD and Texas BoS CoC expectations around record keeping, as well as avoiding the most common audit findings and pitfalls with when doing record keeping and or documentation. So what are some of the purposes behind all this paperwork that we all have to do? Well, first off, it is a requirement by the CoC Interim Rule that recipients and subrecipients establish standard operating procedures regarding documentation and record keeping. So basically, that just means if you're failing to document and keep your records, you're in non-compliance, unfortunately. It also helps protect your program, right? A lot of us think monitoring or an audit of files occur if there's a problem or if there's a complaint. Uh, However, it's not an if, it's a when it will occur. It can happen out of the blue sometimes. Otherwise, it is triggered by complaints. But regardless, it just protects your program having the records done and documents completed. It also helps agencies assess project performance and identify areas of growth. It also helps support system-wide coordination and data integrity via the HMIS systems. Right. It supports this by essentially if the data is in HMIS, the documentation is in HMIS, another agency in your community who makes contact with the same person can see they're already connected. One, it would help prevent duplication of services, and two, they may be able to provide complementary services that are not being offered by your agency. And lastly, it's a roadmap for others. It's a roadmap for managers, other caseworkers who come in and may need to assist the current case manager to continue in their progress for one reason or another. A simple thing to kind of just remember when it comes to the purpose behind paperwork is if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. So, with that kind of being said, what are the general stuff that would be required to go into every participant files? Right. It's a bit of a long list, but for the most part, a lot of this is captured during the intake process or at exit. Right, you have your homeless status documentation, disability verification, income, the referral from coordinated entry, your signed intake forms and release of information. Then you've got your case notes, your housing stabilization plans, your exit status and housing destinations, as well as the HMIS consent, as well as the accurate data entry. So these specifically would be like your services you're entering into HMIS, as well as the assessments being done within HMIS. A thing to kind of think about here is if HUD pulled a file today, could they see who the participant is, why they're eligible, and what assistance have you already given them, and where are they now? And or where are they going in the sense of like what is the trajectory, what is the housing stabilization plan? If you can answer that, then HUD can answer that when there is a monitoring that is occurring. So those were all the stuff that would be typically found in a participant file within the CoC program. So HUD specifically looks for a specific type of evidence for certain types of documents. And here we'll go over quickly what are the hierarchy of evidence that they would prefer, seeing the preferences they would see first. So in the first priority of things is third-party written verification. A lot of this stuff is related to um, homelessness status, disability verification, and income verification. All right, so your third-party written verification are things like, as mentioned on the slide, you can use HMIS doc to see if they have recently been in a shelter. If you have an outreach team, verify that with the outreach team through looking at their logs or case notes, and that could be an HMIS as well, but it may not be. a provider letter. So this could be like a therapist or a doctor who's providing a letter simply stating they are indeed homeless, date it, and then sign it. The second best option for evidence is an intake worker's observation. These things would include detailed case notes and descriptions. So your case notes would be more focused on individuals experiencing homelessness, evident by no grooming has been done, clothes are dirty, um, visited the camp. We were just happened to stumble upon them in their campsite. Things like that would be a intake worker observation. It's not a typical one that most agencies go for because there's a little bit more scrutiny behind it by HUD. The last level of evidence that HUD will use is your self certifications. These aren't preferred by HUD. Um, so do your best to try and minimize these as best you can. But essentially, these are just forms where they're just the participant is citing the document saying that they are yes indeed homeless, and then you would file it away. However, if you are using self certifications, you must document why you're using self certification. So you'll need to put the due diligence you did to try and to gather the third party written verifications. In cases of DV, though, things are a little different. When there's a DV situation, um, documentation should prioritize client safety above all else. So in these cases, a self certification is preferred over everything else. So moving on to kind of the different types of documentation that's needed for participant files. So documenting homelessness status, right? This occurs at the start of identifying if this individual is even eligible for your homeless programs. Right. So typically within our CoC here, we only serve category one and category four at this time. So when you're looking at category one, the preferred examples of documentation are your shelter stays in HMIS, street outreach notes, then finally the signed self certification, which is the last resort. But you could also use things as if for some reason you can't get a hold of the street outreach team's notes, you're going to ask one of the caseworkers there to provide a written letter. It's an example of a provider letter to prove homelessness. Then category four, as we've mentioned before, the preferred method is the self-certification. Other things you can do is ask a DV provider who may be referring to your program for documentation. This is kind of a hit or miss process. A lot of it, domestic violence providers typically won't share the documentation or provide documentation that someone is indeed fleeing a domestic violence situation just because of safety purposes. So it's ultimately would be the last resort that an agency should move to, but not the first option. And finally, when working with anyone who qualifies based on category four definitions, the records truly need to be more secure just for the participants' safety. So then what does HUD expect for chronicity, right? So we're looking at does the individual meet the definition of chronic homelessness status, right? To verify this, this individuals would need to have a verified disability, homelessness, or homelessness for 12 plus months continuously, or 4 episodes within 3 years that total 12 months plus. Right. And in between these 4 episodes, they have to have a minimum of been 7 consecutive days for them to count as separate episodes. An important reminder here is within institutional stays that may occur, such as hospitalizations, rehab, jail. As long as the individual's stays are less than 90 days, this does not break their eligibility of their chronicity, as long as they met all the other criteria prior to entering the facility. However, if it does hit past 90 days, that's where the time clock officially starts over, unfortunately. So the disability requirements. This is a big one, especially if you are a PSH program. It is a requirement for PSH eligibility, right? Before you house somebody, you must have the disability verification completed. Must be documented before housing placement, like I said just a few seconds ago. If you house them first and then you finish their disability verification, you're considered not in compliance. And we don't want that for you. It sucks because sometimes you have to like slow down the housing process just to make sure that they are eligible with the verifiable disability. But again, it protects you all as well to make sure that does happen first. So, what are some acceptable forms for verification of this? You can have a licensed provider letter describing disability and impact. This could be a substance use counselor, a physical health doctor, mental health doctor, psychiatrists, therapists, things like that that would be able to provide that information to you. The SSI or SSDI award letters, specifically, you really need to focus more on the SSDI award letter since that is for the disability. You only can qualify for that if you have a disability. If they have that, that would be sufficient enough to move forward. But it also will serve as a income verification letter as well. And then lastly is observation notes. Observation notes must be done by a qualified professional. So essentially, if you as the caseworker are making notes of there's concerns of disabilities present, a qualified professional must be confirmed by one. But it's a temporary documentation you can use to get someone housed. It's not recommended because if they end up not having a disability, you'd have to then remove them from the program and try and find another resource out there to help them. This is one that THN does not recommend doing at all. On a side note here for rapid rehousing projects, it is still a best practice to gather the disability verification simply because some individuals may be referred to rapid rehousing because there's no beds available in permanent supportive housing. And then the goal is to get them over to permanent supportive housing. Or there are some individuals who score in the range of rapid rehousing through the VIS-FIDAT or another housing assessment, needs assessment, but end up actually needing the permanent supportive housing for it. So you want to try and capture this at the same time of the intake within rapid rehousing or shortly after they've been housed. That way, it's just there as a just in case. Next, this is for every program is documenting income. This is not a question of should you do this. It is you have to do this. It's a requirement within the CoC Interim Rule. So the types of documentation you want to have is records of household income or lack of income. So household income could be proof of pay stubs, Cash App transactions, deposits into their account. I would definitely have them say it's have the person who's depositing the money for them is providing something as a statement at the bottom of like what it's for, work for period between date to date. That way, there's a little bit more legitimacy, and landlords are more often willing to work with that. Otherwise, you could do like an old school receipt book with the carbon copy, um, and have them fill it out, and then have their person who pays them to keep track of it as well. It's usually a bit iffy if landlords will accept it, but it would suffice documenting the income for the CoC interim rule. All right, the next thing you need to do that's related to income is household rent calculations, um, and what their portion of the rent will be. Here at THN, we do have two different rent calculation worksheets, one for transitional and permanent supportive housing. Then the other is for rapid rehousing programs. So we encourage you all to use that. It provides the ability to calculate their monthly income for the rapid rehousing or yearly income, their annual income for permanent supportive housing. Excuse me. And it provides you the rental contributions of both the agencies and the households based on a different style of a progressive engagement model for rapid rehousing, and then the three requirements for options for PSH and TH projects. We aren't going to, unfortunately, be able to dive into this today. We do have a recording of this on YouTube as well in the same playlist, but I will link the worksheets into the descriptions below. You want to document, then you want to document the amount of assistance provided. Again, makes things easy for everybody using the worksheet because it's already telling them. You do want a copy of the Public Housing Authority's utility schedule. One, because it prevents you from having to keep looking for it every time, and it also allows, if HUD does monitor you, to know that you're not just pulling numbers out of thin air, because they will have access to this as well. You can get this information on your Public Housing Authority's website. If your area of Texas doesn't have a public housing authority they're designated for it, you can get it on TDHCA's website, and it's updated yearly, so it will need to be changed at least once a year. And then finally, the participant income. It's on. It seems like it's on there twice, but you want to keep the participant income information as well as the total household income information, because they're two separate things. Sometimes the household isn't necessarily the full client that you're working with, and it's really just the head of household you're working with. So keeping track of their income can help track progress towards self-sufficiency. So rapid rehousing documentation, income, and rent. So this is the specific documentation process for rapid rehousing projects. All right, first you start with a rapid rehousing enrollment. Then you move on to the initial rental assistance assessment. And then here in the CoC, Texas Balance Estate CoC, we do require rapid rehousing agencies to reassess every 3 months, or as needed if there's a substantial change in income between those 3 months. And then finally, exit. So within rapid rehousing documentation, you need proof of income, like we've mentioned in the other slide. These can be pay stubs, benefits letters, cash app, deposits that you can find on the app. If they're self-employed, tax returns, certificate of zero income. This is essentially where they're signing a form saying that they indeed have no income. THN provides a copy of an example of this that agencies can use as well. And then you can use a self-certification form with documented efforts to verify if there are no other documentation available. Again, I always try to avoid these for a couple purposes. One, landlords aren't going to accept these. If you're trying to use their income to help get them into housing quicker. If plus there's no way to really verify it. So I always try, like I said, try to find other methods. The receipt books are really good if they get paid through Cash App, Zelle, those types of apps. Another good resource to keep track of things. So those are things you want to encourage your participants to be doing to track their income. And then lastly, you want to document their rent contributions. Would be with the rapid rehousing rent calculation worksheet that I mentioned, and also the copy of the Public Housing Authority utility schedule. So this is income continued. So you want the financial assistance provided. So essentially, you want to ensure that you're inputting your financial assistance in HMIS. Within many projects, you have the ability to input services for the security deposit. Excuse me, security deposit. If you had to pay your first month's last month's rent, to be able to put in the exact dollar amount for that service. Your monthly rental assistance payments that you're doing. Again, you would document the services in there, but in that service, you would be able to put the monthly the cost for that payment, as well as of any utility payments if it's applicable. Sometimes it's not. This is usually only applicable if they are someone with no income and they choose to let the agency pay for their utilities through their utility allowance. Also, make sure you're including a lease agreement, a landlord payment ledger. Um, Sometimes the landlord payment ledger may not be involved in the participant file. It may be kept separately digitally, but just make sure it's readily available to where you're just tracking how much you all have been paying in assistance for the participant, as well as proof of payment to the property. These could be things as simple as a receipt, if they can easily provide one, a letter saying that they've received the check and this is a receipt for the payment of the rent amount signed by them. Things like that will work all the time. If you are paying online, you usually get a confirmation of the payment. Take a screen capture or print it and keep it in the participant's record for that. So rapid reaction continued with the reassessments. The CoC interim rule requires at least an annual assessment, so once per year if they're in the program longer than a year. However, within the BoS CoC's written standards of service delivery, we do require program rapid rehousing programs to reassess every 3 months. So, what are the reassessment documentation that you would need? So, these would be things such as updated income/rent calculations as needed, um, HMIS reassessments, if any change. So, these would be your income assessments, your financial assessments, things like that. Changes in household composition circumstances, so updating their household information in HMIS if someone's moved out, moved in, as well as participants' progress towards self sufficiency. This usually can be done through uh, case management notes, suffice for these, and then your updated housing stabilization plan. Again, I can't stress this enough. Within our CoC, you must reassess every 3 months at a minimum. However, with the housing stabilization plan, I always did it a check-in every 2 weeks and then updated it as needed within those every 2 weeks if progress has been made or we needed to add a new goal or new steps. So then you're always ahead of the curve, and it helps keep the participant aware of what their stabilization plan is instead of being like, all right, we've checked it once every 3 months. They may not remember it, or if you give them a copy, they may have misplaced it. So moving on to documentation for income and participant contributions for PSH programs. With PSH, there's a little bit of difference on when you do some of this. So with income verification, similarly to rapid rehousing, you're doing that at the entry, and annually, right? There's not really any need for a reassessment within rapid rehousing, and similar to rapid rehousing as so within PSH programs, the annually suffices. So again, what are some acceptable documentation? Right, your pay stubs, bank statements, benefits letters, things like that. You can do the self-certificate form here. However, again, I don't like those personally, and they're not very helpful in the long run of things. So just kind of be mindful if you do go down that right to do a little bit more research and your own due diligence before going in that direction. So participant rent contributions or occupancy charges. So just as a quick reminder, within PSH programs, a program can charge either an occupancy charge if they're a leasing program, but not rent, or if they are a tenant-based rental assistance model, they can charge rent, but they can't charge occupancy charge. And by charge rent, I mean they are required to do a rental contribution. So within there, you want to for this, you want to document your rent calculations and your utility calculation worksheet. Again, we have a PSH calculation worksheet you all can use. Excuse me. Must not exceed 30% of the household's monthly adjusted income, and if there's no income, zero certification form. So your PSH documentation with your annual assessments. Right? HUD requires annual recertification of income, rent contribution, and occupancy charges. So these are things that you would require are very similar to what a rapid rehousing recertification or reassessment would be. So your rent calculation, your income documentation, your annual HQSs, which your HQSs are also a requirement for, and that's your housing quality survey. Was also required in rapid rehousing as well. Those also need to be done annually there. Your annual rent reasonableness, excuse me, individual service plans, annual HMIS assessments, your annual assessment of service needs, and then the individual service plan. Moving on to HMIS and confidentiality, forms that you do need to have are your releases of information signed so that they are able to be put into HMIS, things like that, and as well have their information shared with THN and other agencies, or if it's just agency specific, you can update that itself within HMIS. You want to store these files securely. So if you're not uploading paper documents to HMIS, you need to make sure they're secure. They need to be in a locked cabinet, things like that, and not just loosely strung out on someone's desk. With DV projects, you're not able to use HMIS, but you are required to use a comparable database. So we typically here in the BOS use Osnium as the comparable database. So please remember that's something you'll need to do there as well with the releases of information. And lastly, do not share participant information without consent, especially if it's a domestic violence project. There's a little bit more requirements behind when you can release information and things like that. Also, don't throw away all your paper files too soon or delete files um, as well. All right. Participant records must be kept for 5 years after the grant closes out. For construction or rehab projects, that's 15 years you must keep the information, the files. And lastly, so then you want to keep your intake paperwork, eligibility and income documents, your exit forms, case notes, and HMIS logs as well. Do you want to keep these? Electronic files should also be uploaded to HMIS and be legible. I am a strong component of if you do paper documentation, you then upload it to HMIS and attach it to their files there. It is very simple. The HMIS data team can assist you with learning this process, but it is something I strongly encourage. Ultimately, then what happens during a monitoring? So, what does HUD and THN look for during their our own monitorings? So, both THN and HUD will use the HUD exhibits during a monitoring. I have an image of the document itself a little bit. It's the CPD Monitoring Handbook 6509.2. We have another document that I'll also link that has a little bit more specific on what chapters we would use as well as what HUD would use. So here in Texas BoS CoC, the monitoring strategy here at THN is we will do on-site monitorings and desk/remote reviews of CoC recipients. Typically, these are going to be triggered by client complaints, continuous poor performances during the CoC competition, or the quarterly performance scorecards as well. We typically will try and give at least a few weeks notice before we do any of these, so that way, especially on an on-site monitoring, just to make sure you're all understanding what's going to come, what's going to happen. These are not gotcha moments. These are just to doing our responsibility by with which is stated within the CoC Interim Rule, but also to provide assistance to agencies to help identify and clarify areas of improvement and growth. Agencies should also be engaged in self-monitoring. This is a requirement of both the CoC Interim Rule and the written standards of service delivery here within our CoC. So some examples of these would be your peer-to-peer file review, the annual review of participant files by management or leadership of the agency or program. I particularly like the peer-to-peer file review because these can be done typically monthly or bi-monthly, to where the case managers get together, they bring the current active participants in the files in there, and then they swap, and then they each write down what they're finding is missing or areas of improvement that's needed in the file, and then give that to the correct case manager, and then they have the time to fix the deficiencies and to ensure everything's there. And it also provides a little less stressful environment of, say, a program supervisor or director coming in and doing all the file reviews and being like, hey, you messed up, you need this information in there, right? Those types of conversations are fun to have, not really, and can be stressful for case managers thinking they're in trouble when it's really just the director or program manager may just be trying, like, hey, you're not in, you could even say you're not in trouble, and they're still going to think they're in trouble because it's coming from someone in a leadership position. So the peer-to-peer file reviews are fantastic to help with that. So then what are some best practices and strategies to stay on top of documentation? First off, using standardized reassessment forms. Within HMIS, there are the reassessment forms for income that we require agencies to use. You may use additional reassessment forms to gather more information. That's perfectly fine, but you want to make sure it's standard across the board. Another example of things you could do are use your calendar to track due dates. This is something I love all the time. Um, just to make sure, because it's hard to sometimes keep track of, depending on how long your caseload is, too. When is the 3 month assessments, and then when are the annual assessments sometimes? The other thing you can do with that is put goals within HMIS, within participant files, and they'll send a reminder that, hey, the time's up. Things like that can be helpful as well. The HMIS team can also help you look at doing something like that as well. You want to also build time into the day to ensure documentation is done for the case management appointments done that day. So typically, if you do it, if you meet with people early in the morning, you want to carve out some time in the afternoon to get it done, and then vice versa as well. Otherwise, you can also do the document in during the conversations you're having with participants. That one's a little hard to do, and sometimes it's uncomfortable at first. So find a strategy that works best for you. Uh, Use a file checklist. So here at THN, we do provide two different types of file checklists for permanent supportive housing as well as rapid rehousing, which I'll open one of those right now for you. This is the rapid rehousing checklist. Here you're going to be able to have your all the required documents possible is listed here. And they're done through steps, your general HMIS information, the exit. This is all something you're going to have to wait till the end for. Then you've got your supportive services, the housing documents. All right, your supportive services include participant case notes, household budget forms, and then you have your ongoing reassessment needs. So you have your initial assessment with all the documents you would need, your 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, and then the 21st month, depending on how long they're in the program or how long your program allows someone to stay within the rapid rehousing program, as well as sections for if change of income is reported. Typically, with rapid rehousing, I would recommend anything higher than $200. You want to do it triggers a reassessment. So this is an example of one of the forms that we have that is usable. And then the same thing for the permanent supportive housing checklist. It's very similar. You've got your general, you've got your supportive services, your enrollment eligibility form, your housing documentation, and your exits. And then you have your annual ongoing needs, the ongoing reassessments. And let's get back to the PowerPoint. And then finally, have some form of self-monitoring strategy in place. Like I said, HUD does require a record keeping policies and procedures. Self-monitoring strategies are are a part of record keeping and or should be a part of record keeping policies and procedures. Also, here within the CoC, our written standards do explicitly state you need to have self-monitoring strategies in place. So just here's some quick resources. You have the interim rule, you have the virtual binders, which has some great information in there about the CoC programs. You also have our written standards of service delivery there. Um, Scroll to the bottom page before the appendix. That is where that's where the monitoring strategies are for here in the BOS. So take a look there. And then finally, your BOS CoC file checklist for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. If anyone has any questions or need a little bit more guidance on this topic, feel free to reach out to our planning team's email at texasboscoc@thn.org, and someone from our team will reach out or follow up with you. Otherwise, if you also know your coordinator uh, information email, you can reach out to them as well. Thank you all today for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you. Bye.